Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third installment of Complete Croc. I'm King Crocoduck here with my co-hosts, the Academic Agent and Zarathustra Serpent. Today we have a special guest, Gary Edwards. Gary, why don't you briefly introduce yourself and then we'll introduce the topic.
Hello, I'm Gary Edwards, and I'm an English philosopher. I'm on YouTube as well.
Great.
Brief enough? Brief enough?
Very good. It works for me. Well, we're going to be trying to resolve today what can be known, and this is going to tie into questions of truth, which last time toward the end we didn't seem to be able to get an agreement over. So let's introduce the topic. Agent Zarathustra Serpent, what do you think can be known?
Well, look, Descartes, when he starts, basically creates the new philosophy, the modern philosophy. He starts with the question: what can we be certain of? And he tries to build on that. If I can find something that we can be absolutely certain of, we can build on that and know the truth. 350 years later, I think the answer is nothing. We can't be certain of anything. And so we basically changed our the way we look at it, and basically philosophy now is saying about like the questions like is the outside world real, outside of my brain, or is it all a figment of my imagination? What philosophy basically says, philosophers have been saying that this question is retarded. That's basically that's basically the answer. Because it's not productive to think that it's not just a figment of your imagination, and also to believe that you'll have to believe so many crazy things that it's ridiculous to think that. But you don't have certainty, but it's just not a productive and clever question. But the big problem, what we had a disagreement on last time, the thing is, since Plato basically says that if you know the truth, it makes you happy. Truth brings you joy, and if you build your life based on that truth, you will be happy, and you will also be good. You will be moral. And that was the idea of why we need to know the truth. And if you go take it until the 17th century, someone like Spinoza, he derives. He believes that the brain can know the truth about the world, and from the basically can know the nature of God, and from that derive the nature of the world, and from that derive the nature of man, and from that you derive ethics. You derive the way of life which will make you happy and moral.
All right.
So what was the disagreement?
The disagreement is that. Yeah.
I personally, I personally think that I don't really believe in a plurality of truths. I'm not really sure how I feel about this definition of truth.
It's not about plurality of truth. It's about that we no longer can believe that we can know the truth, the absolute truth. And because of that created the split, because what you're talking about with science is basically how do we acquire knowledge, and this is, we agree that science gives us the best knowledge of the world, but it doesn't give us the truth. And if it doesn't give us the truth, then the whole story about joy, the whole Platonic story about joy, is basically dead. But the question is, okay, so what was that joy that people always talked about when they believed that they found the truth?
Plato also said that knowledge is justified through. Sorry, Zarathustra, you're echoing a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, what do you two think? Well, give me your take, Agent Gary.
Well, I follow the teachings of the academic skeptics from ancient Greece. I strive to achieve ataraxia, that is, a refusal to judge. I suspend my judgment and thereby
do you live
thereby
without
achieve
belief?
tranquility.
So do you live without belief? And if so, how do you achieve that?
Yeah, I try to follow Pyro.
I believe I have no belief.
I tried to follow, what was his name? Pyro of Pyro.
So the one who jumped in the volcano.
Pyro of Ellis, who was so skeptical that he wouldn't even change his direction when he went. He'd be walking across a road and there'd be a wagon coming or a chariot, and he wouldn't even change. He wouldn't even change direction. His followers would have to push him out of the way because he couldn't be sure if a wagon was coming or not. He'd also just freely kind of walk off a cliff or something because he couldn't be sure if the cliff edge was really there or not.
Possibly apocryphal.
Possibly but yeah, I think it was mainly like, as I understand it was mainly Cicero just making fun of these guys. But my understanding, so to me, there comes a limit. I'm only joking, obviously. But there comes a real limit to radical skepticism of that nature, and I think in the Hellenistic period they took it way too far, and I just think that when you take it as far as that, it comes to see how absurd it is to doubt everything, and really Descartes, as I understand it, he's just basically taking that. Mental exercise to the next, to the nth degree, to doubting everything.
That's methodical skepticism.
I would even though I think skepticism is generally healthy, I would tend towards a more common sense approach, which just, at a certain point you have to accept that certain things are there, and that's fine. I'm not going to think about it anymore. So I tend towards empiricism, I would say.
So on the one hand, you might have someone like Descartes who was saying that he was inquiring after the possibility of absolute certainty, and then on the other hand, you might have, I don't know, somebody like Wittgenstein on certainty, who's claiming, well, yeah, but you can't have complete thoroughgoing skepticism either. So we're trapped between those two things. We can't have absolute certainty, but we can't have absolute sort of skepticism, thoroughgoing skepticism either. But it may be a useful place to start is what is truth? How do you define truth? Is truth a matter of representation, or is this a matter of coherence? What is it? What bears truth? What are the truth bearers, and what are the truth makers? What makes something true? These are generally the questions that are addressed when we talk about truth. What would your views on those questions be?
I would define truth as a label that we assign to propositions in accordance with some epistemology.
So you're saying the bearer of truth are propositions. Statements, if you were, that it makes sense to say it is true that X, and if that's the case, then X it qualifies as a statement, and that's the bearer of truth. Would anybody agree with that or disagree with that?
Yeah, although I would maybe generalize that and say networks of propositions are sort of the best way to go these days, rather than just individual ones.
Okay, so you're saying that theories are bearers of truth.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So would anybody disagree that statements or sets of statements are the bearer of the things that we say rightfully are true? Because there are other views. There are views that reality is the bearer of truth, and truth is derived through either identity with or representation, or by being represented by statements.
You see, I feel like we need to distinguish between, I don't know what they call it. Do they call it abstract truth? Like, say, for example, 2 plus 2 equals 4.
There has been talk
Yeah.
of the truth in this so far, which is interesting, as if there's a singular overarching truth. I mean, that in itself is a question.
I want to say that mathematical truths are a different category that we can lay to one side. I want to talk about. I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing here. I don't know. The classic one would be, I'm sitting with my feet on a chair here. The reality would be, I guess, what was it? The cold, hard truth of the chair is actually an object here in front of me. This is the sort of thing that we're getting towards, right?
That would be a realist view, whereas the semantic view would be the proposition: I am sitting with my feet on a chair. That's the bearer of the truth, not the reality of the chair itself. The semantic approach is obviously more constructivist, because language is constructed and language is more open-ended, whereas the reality of the chair in itself and your disposition of your feet regarding the chair could be seen as being somewhat more concrete or true in itself.
And I would tend towards the view that language is an imperfect vessel to get us there, but it's alluding to something beyond my statement that is actually there. So I guess I'm advocating some form of materialism here, something like that.
It could be materialism. The specific nature of the ontology doesn't come into it till later, but it's like a pictorial theory of truth. There's a picture where there's certain things that stand in certain relation in reality. And if your statement pictures that state of affairs, those relations accurately, then your statement becomes the bearer of truth. So it's truth. The origins of truth are in a reality.
Yeah.
The opposing view to that would be that truth is, for example, just a semantic property. It's a property that the statement has under certain conditions when it's verified. We don't actually have to dig down into the absolute truth of things in themselves, the noumenal view, in order to be able to report on the truth of things. We merely have to have a good stab at verifying them and having good reasons to say them. And we don't need an ultimate picture, a God's eye view of the ultimate substance of reality. And that would be again the difference between what Zarathustra was on about, which is the truth, as is some overarching God's eye noumenal view of everything, as opposed to, well, it's true that my feet are on a chair. There's we can allow some leeway to my feet are on a chair. I mean, in terms of first order properties, your feet aren't on a chair. There's an arrangement of atoms arranged in space. Yeah, and they aren't really feet, chair, and so forth are merely constructs that are added on later.
So I mean, one of the things I was thinking, the reason why I mentioned the academic skeptics at the top here is that if you follow them, they end up with a chap called Sextus Empiricus. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
And he wrote these. He basically built on previous generations of skeptics to come up with these 10 modes. I have them listed here. And basically his conclusion is that after going through each of the 10 modes, the only rational conclusion to draw is that nothing can be known. So let me just read you these 10 modes and see where that takes us, okay? Because he says, 1, from differences among animals. 2, from differences among human beings. 3, from differences among the senses. So you see where he's going here. There's no statement you can make about animals that is true because animals are different. There's no statement about human beings that are true because there are so many differences among humans, etc., etc. From differences among the senses. Number 4, contrasting circumstances. So number 5, contrasting positions, distances, and places. Number 6, contrasting mixtures. Number 7, contrasting qualities and compositions. Number 8, from relativity. Number 9, according to constant or rare occurrence. And number 10, contrasting ways of life, customs, laws, myths, and dogmatic assumptions. And so basically says nothing. The only thing the wise man should think after all of that is that when push comes to shove, nothing can be known.
Yeah, well, the thing with classical skeptics weren't skeptics in the modern, in the post-Cartesian sense. The sort of early modern Cartesian skepticism we inherit from that is rather distinct from the ancient classical skeptics, because they weren't suggesting that from those contingencies nothing at all can be known, and thereby implying that there's an absolute certain knowledge that we're deprived of. The original classical skeptics were literally inquirers. They didn't rule out knowledge at all, and they didn't rule out certainly. Atraxia was a thing of a state of acceptance of the limits of what was known, and not doing one's head in by pursuing things one can't have, or ignoring things that one don't know. It was quite a moderate position. So the classical skeptics, they could suspend belief, but they could also suspend disbelief.
I've got this one as well, and the reason I'm reading these out is because I'm actually thinking of King Croc, the scientist here. How does he respond to these? This is Agrippa. He has something called the 5 modes: the mode from dispute, the mode throwing one back ad infinitum. That's the infinite regress argument. The mode deriving from relativity, the hypothetical mode, the reciprocal or circular mode. And basically, these are all kind of like logical black holes that arguments ultimately, like if you follow an argument back far enough, you disappear down one of these, and therefore it's basically like reason can't get us there. That's how I understand it. Have I got that wrong, Gary?
Yeah, because you can't get out of a black hole. A black hole is terminal.
Yeah, I think Wittgenstein answers a lot of these problems. Yeah, because for instance, what you read from Sextus Empiricus is basically that you can't generalize, right? That you can't say about, like Aristotle tried to say about humans, about you can't use a general term. Because every human is different, so you can't define a human. But then, so Wittgenstein comes in with the family resemblance thing. Yeah, that you can talk about something as long as you accept that you're talking about family resemblance. That things are you only have certain characteristics. That there is no one defining characteristic of a human. But there's a group of or anything else you talk about. But there's this group of characteristics which you have some of them, and that makes you a human or whatever you talk about.
They're similar in a way that members of a family might be similar.
Yeah.
They're not identical, but there's a recognizable similarity there.
Yeah.
It's a vague set. They belong to a vague set, and as long as you qualify your doubt in terms of vague sets, you're not condemned to absolute skepticism, and that's
the same with the infinite regression. Yeah, it says you have to end that. You have to, at some point you have to say, okay, that I'm stopping. We can't go further than that, because there will always be further than that. So you have to say, okay, we understand what we are talking about. So that solves that. Now I want to just go back though, because okay, so you define truth in that way. But there is also what we left behind, the experience of truth, which is that white light that Plato talks about. And that's the question. And this is where we had our disagreement, because so what is this white light? If we don't know the truth, where does it come from? So it's actually a psychological experience. And some say we want to experience that. We want to experience this psychological experience, and if you take a lot of philosophy from the 19th century onwards go in the psychological route. I mean, for Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, the phenomenologists, the existentialists, it's about the experience of truth,
Heidegger.
Heidegger. And this is what I was talking about in my video on postmodernism, where I talked about in the end about there's this ecstatic experience of truth which we want to capture and we want to live by. because that makes us happy. So this is the other side of it.
Okay, so is that akin to the claim that what makes the truth maker is an aesthetic, an epiphany? Yeah, and a revelationary aesthetic is the truth maker, like the religious conception of truth.
A revelation, but you don't think that it is that you actually did see the truth. You understand that it's just a psychological thing. You just the way I understand it is that you understand the spirit of the time. You
Okay,
connect
so,
to.
Okay, so it's a zeitgeist thing. Okay. How is that? Is that really in the realm of epistemology, though?
Well, it's
as it's understood in say analytic philosophy, where there's more of a technical concern with truth, or is it something more poetic?
It's more in look. It's more something. I'm Nietzschean, yeah. So Nietzsche talks about this. He calls it the feeling of power, the sense of power. Which when you create a picture of the world that seems to fit everything at that moment, and you know in the end it will collapse. You know in the end you will realize that it doesn't fit the world, but at that moment it gives you the sense of power that you manage to impose yourself on the world. The truth, you found the truth.
Can I just
it's like there are people who feel empowered by falsehoods. And there's, wouldn't those be problematic? And also, if you know that it's not true, how is it true?
It's the truth of the moment.
Yeah, but you said it's such a psychological. So at the same time, it's true and it's not true. I believe this is true, but at the same time, I know that it's not true. It's a psychological state. It's an elated state, a transcendent state.
Yes.
But is it truly epistemic? Or is it open to terrible abuse and foolishness and the absence of wisdom, lest we be led astray, believe things to be so that are not?
Not if you continue to think critically and to continue to criticize it and once you realize that that it's not the truth, you abandon it.
Can I just try to get concrete example here? Like Zarathustra, do you have in mind, for example, I don't know, a teenager in the late 60s listening to Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, and it strikes them as being true, quote unquote, it's in some profound way that Satisfaction speaks to their life in some way.
I think it was more like Bob Dylan and the psychedelia, which was the seen as the truth, as giving you the truth. Yeah, this is what I talk about. I have this series about psychedelia. Where you feel like it gives you the truth, and they believe that they saw the truth, but
like Bob, like I don't know. Say if you take Bob Dylan as the example, Bob Dylan is, I mean, he's still talking about the real world. So that when he says, I don't know, advertising signs con you into thinking you're the one, etc., he is talking about something in the real world that you might recognize.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the Marxists would say he's alluding to something in reality that is being covered up by ideology or lies in the everyday world, and he's grasping through and poking to something more real, quote unquote. Okay, so if we take that as the example, Gary, what's your answer to what do you think about thinking of a Bob Dylan song as true in that way?
I think art isn't particularly well disposed to discerning truth, but that it doesn't have to be, because that's not its job. It's much better at engaging our critical faculties with regards to values. At least it was before the critical theory said all the art is shot. But the art's particularly good at making us reevaluate our values. And when we realize something through a work of art, when something like the Trojan women go back to that when the Athenians perhaps realized that they were being an aggressive colonial power in their treatment of their conquests, and then maybe we could speak of that roughly as truth, but it's not the epistemic truth. It's not that we believe something and we've inquired into the evidential grounds of that belief. What it is we feel something, we have a set of values, but we've had some other set of values that we had brought to bear on that, and the values we had previously that have made us re-reflect, and then we've shifted, we've changed. I think that kind of artistic revelation is incredibly valuable, and as valuable as what science does, but it isn't what science does. And I think what science does is probably better epistemically.
Yes, I agree. And when I talk about getting knowledge of the world, I'll go to science. But when I talk about being happy, science doesn't tell me how to be happy. So when I talk about this,
inject oxytocin into your brain regularly by a certain amount.
No, I don't think that's happiness.
But isn't happiness a question for ethics rather than a question for epistemology?
Okay, this is the distinction between ethics and epistemology as clearly distinct.
Yes.
What about meta ethics? So we don't, especially if you're a virtue ethicist. If you're a virtue ethicist, you usually have some notion of a telos or an end that you judge against, and surely your beliefs about what the world is will affect your telos.
The summum bonum, as it were.
Yeah. So the two things in the again, it's an Enlightenment idea. Mainly comes down to Kant again, and Kant's reading of you that there's a sharp value and distinction between values and facts. It might not be an absolute distinction. It's clearly two different things we're perhaps engaged with. And I think there are tools that, as I've said previously, there are tools that do each of those jobs very well. I think what we've developed in the natural sciences in particular are very good at putting our beliefs up to critical scrutiny, our theories in which our beliefs exist. And I think the arts, which are terribly neglected and bullied and undervalued, are exceptionally good at making us reassess our values. And I agree with Zarathustra that there's a lot to be said for what the arts can bring to our understanding critically and make us reevaluate our ideas of who we are and what we value. I'd just be careful about attributing the word truth to that, because truth tends to have an epistemic meaning, which is distinct. For example, you say psychedelia, the revelation of one's own mind. What is given in the revelation of one's own mind, and is it trustworthy? Or is there a myth of the given? Is that it's the idea because something seems immediately given to us by introspection upon our own mind or some state, that it's trustworthy? It's like an intuitive knowledge. Is intuitive knowledge trustworthy?
Well, it's true. It's true in the sense that it makes me happy. And again, I'm talking about the experience of truth, which I'm detaching from the question of epistemological truth. And because why I call it truth is because I explore pop culture, pop music of the 20th century. There's always been with every musical style, the fans of that style always distinguish between real and fake, real jazz and fake jazz, real rock and roll, fake rock and roll, real funk, fake funk, etc. And so what is that real thing? That is the truth. That is the truth, and that truth is personal, and it's temporary.
It's authenticity. It's authenticity within the zeitgeist, within the spirit of the age.
Yes.
I see what you mean. It's just the word truth. It's maybe I'm getting all naturalistic and sciencey in my defense of truth.
The way I would see, because obviously I thought about this a lot. Writing the book I'm writing right now, and the way I think the way Zarathustra is thinking about it is not intuitive to me. The way I would think of it is this: there is such a thing as human nature, okay, and human nature has these characteristics. Biology can explain those characteristics in the way that biology can do it. Psychology can explain those characteristics in the way that psychology can explain it. But maybe a great writer like a Bob Dylan or a Shakespeare or a Henry James or whoever you want to pick, okay, maybe they are tapping into aspects of whatever human nature is when they're writing their book. They're tapping into something that is fundamental to us, and we can recognize that. They're just describing the same thing in different ways. And in fact, what I'm interested in is finding those moments of crossover between the way that different disciplines explain the same thing. I think this is just my own view. I think that you can pick up a book of economics, a book on psychology, a great work of literature, piece of philosophy, and you can find all of those different people in their own different ways spotting the same patterns, the same things in a common humanity. And that's what I would say is true, is whatever those characteristics of humanity happen to be, if we're talking about mankind. So I don't know what you think about it, because Zarathustra seems to be rooting it in his subjective experience, and I would be rooting it in more, I don't know, the collective observations of many different people, even if they're separated by history and culture.
Do you think that these things are historically can be tied to historical periods? Was there a say a modernist zeitgeist that informed science, art, and the humanities between, say, I don't know, 1912 and 1962, and then from 1962 to 2012 there was a postmodernist zeitgeist that informed the sciences, the arts, and human culture in general? Is it
yes.
historical?
Yes, I don't think. I think it's. I don't think it can be denied. Actually, that we have this historical period, this paradigm thing, and the thing is, you're in this kind of paradigm, and you find, and again, the reason why I call it truth is because I tie to that experience, that transcendence thing that people used to call truth in the past, like Plato. Yeah. So what I'm saying, they didn't experience the truth. They experienced that psychological experience that I'm talking about, and so it didn't come from them actually seeing the truth, but from thinking, but from basically connecting to something in the own zeitgeist, which triggered a feeling of transcendence. And this is a feeling that I want to recreate, because it's a happy feeling. So this is something that I focus on, and I mean, so I go with philosophers like Nietzsche who talked about it. But again, this is not. If you want to acquire knowledge about the world, that is not the way. Then I would go with science. Yeah. So those are two different things.
Would you acknowledge that science can change and revise the way we see ourselves in the world? We can identify aspects that are historical, but we can also perhaps identify certain aspects of humanity, which is more what I think academic is on about, which is that are more timeless and more sort of like universal across time. There's a difference there.
Well, I'm skeptical of that.
I have a quotation from one of my faves here, old Thomas Sowell, who captures perhaps the contrast between us here quite well. He says, "The issue is not as to whether changes have occurred in human history, but whether these are in effect changes of costumes and scenery, or changes of the play itself." And I am suggesting that it's just costumes and scenery, and I think Zarathustra may be getting towards its changes of the play itself. The reason I posit that it's costumes and scenery is because, you know, the experience of jumping from Aristotle to Cicero to Seneca to, I don't know, a dude writing in the 18th century, and all of them picking out, or Hume or whoever it is, okay. The experience of them all picking out things that I can recognize sitting here in 2017 as being recognizably human, that seems to me to strike a core. You know, I mean, I mentioned last week the Beatles song, I Saw Her Standing There.
Yeah.
Do I have to be a teenager in 1964 or 63 or whenever it was to recognize the experience of being 17 and seeing a girl standing across the way?
No, you can
the answer is
choice as well. That's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, you get exactly the same image cropping up in a Shakespeare play from 1596.
Okay, so
my answer to that would be that we are still in the period that we can understand this thing. Some things are so it's just a matter of the so those timeless things that we call about. Aristotle was only about 2,300 years ago. So if we extend it to like maybe 50,000 years from now, then people will know maybe will be different. Yeah.
Can I suggest a synthesis? Can I suggest a synthesis from what I say between the distinction between you? Not everything changes at the same rate. Though things are in flux and changing, not everything changes at the same rate. And we might not only have a cultural history, we might have a natural history. Yeah, and these and we might be the products of these different rates of change.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Again, Nietzsche believed that even if we change the way we think, even our biology will change eventually.
But I mean,
but it's a long process. It says 80,000.
But if we just study the facts, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd all agree that people got jealous in Aristotle's time. People got jealous in the Roman period. Through 1,000 years more of hardcore feudalism, in which people were serfs, divided into serfs and nobles. People still got jealous in Chaucer. People still got jealous by the time you get to the 1600s.
This is true.
But people still get jealous now.
But the issue is what we call jealousy might not be a solid monolith or a singular uncomplicated thing. It may have components, and those different components might change at different rates. There might be things, certain things that we consider basic emotions like disgust or anger. They've had different manifestations through history. There's components of them, parts of them that are clearly recognizable. And I'd say perhaps that belongs to the natural history that changes slowly. But there are parts of them also that are radically different, and we can't even quite understand what Shakespeare meant by some things because his conceptions of certain psychological mental states are different to ours. And maybe that's the cultural component that changes quicker.
But I mean, it's interesting you mentioned disgust, because I mean that's one of the things that that is one of the things that they think, and they've repeated these findings in psychology and in sociology. It's one of those things that they think is truly universal to human beings, but also unique to human beings. So everybody recognizes the disgust face. Picture a baby biting into a lemon for the first time, and it's that face. Human beings are the only animals who recognize contagion. So that is, if your piece of food has been touched by some object that you consider to be a contaminant, you will know not to touch it, and you'll have the disgust response. Let's say I took a pie and mashed it in a piece of shit. So you would have a disgust response, whereas other animals do not have that response, and that response seems to be universal across all known cultures, all known people.
The thing with that is omnivore. There's a number of omnivores that show things that are kind of similar, but what humans have is we have a cultural aspect around that as well that is unique to us. We have a cultural concept of disgust because we're the only creatures that have, and that again, it sort of illustrates the idea that something that we consider, you might consider, or we might consider to be singular and given just to us just through analysis of human psychology, which is disgust, is actually it's a bit more fractured than we think, and bits of it are adapted, changing at different rates.
Right.
Nature builds the house and culture decorates it.
That's right. And the decoration,
Yeah.
the houses go through a lot more decorations than they do major structural revisions over time.
And just to run with this example, because I think we're getting on to the synthesis that you're talking about. Whatever is considered sacred or taboo at a given time might, like the discussed response is a constant, but what is considered a pollutant or a stain morally changes from age to age. So, you know, the way a Puritan would react in the height of the Reformation, he may have a very different concept of what sin is to what we do now.
Yes.
I think Jonathan Haidt talked about Donald Trump being stained by his comments on the KKK. You know, his apparent failure to condemn neo-Nazis. That's like the ultimate black mark, or it was the ultimate black mark in our culture now. But they would have had a very different response in 1302. So you can see that the contingencies change, but the structure stays the same. Does that make sense? Yeah.
You experience it differently if your culture is different. Yeah, it's not just that you react differently. You actually experience things differently. Let's say sexual attraction. You will experience it differently if you believe that it comes from Satan. Yeah, that puts sin in your flesh. Or if you believe that it's a biological thing, it's not just that you will interpret it differently, you will experience it differently. It's a different kind of experience when you feel sexual attraction. If you are a Puritan, or if you are someone who is a secular, so it's actually a different thing. It's actually a different experience.
Is it entirely a different experience?
Not entirely, but.
Or is the way you talk about it a different experience? The connotations, the things it's linked with, the metaphors one might use, the analogies one might use to explain it. Do those change?
I think that if you believe that it comes from Satan, it will always be accompanied also by shame.
Yeah. But again, that's complicated, isn't it? That's like bringing in it's like affecting the whole framework. There's different parts of the framework, and the network are responding in different ways. Different weights have been given, but there might be something that's rather more similar at the core.
But look at the similarities between attempts to inculcate white privilege shame and the shame that would have accompanied a Puritan and the good old-fashioned Catholic shame. I mean,
privilege and sin. Privilege is sin.
It seems to me that no matter which time you're born in, there's this pervasive sense of guilt that you're meant to feel at any one time by moral do-gooders.
You can recognize the game, can't you?
Yeah,
you recognize the game they're playing. What they're doing.
It's like Jizz a Genius from the Wu-Tang Clan said. What did he say? The game stays the same, only the players change. That's kind of what I feel like.
Although,
I mean,
because if he's
change, but the fundamentals are basically the same, right?
Because this is what I'd say to you, Zarathustra. If what you're saying is true, then what can we learn from history? Because all we have is the current zeitgeist now. Doesn't history teach us any truth that, if not eternal, at least not just temporary and particular?
Since things change at a different rate, we can say things that are true today and 5,000 years ago. But I don't extrapolate from that it's universal and eternal. I'm skeptical about it being universal and eternal.
Well, universal, something is universal if it applies to all similarly situated beings. Well, of course, it's going to be a matter of how you define similarly situated and the temporal kind of the temporal features that you think being similarly situated is wrapped up in. Similarly situated is in still a recognizable member of a similar species, or just a similar culture at the same time. It's again, it comes down to this thing that it's not simple and straightforward. Some things in human nature can change quite quickly in response to cultural changes, basic economic conditions, the inventions of technologies, and things like that. Others don't. Others are more stick around a bit more.
Are there no universal experiences? I mean, a person who gets his hand cut off today, are they not experiencing the same thing that a person in a different culture 1,000 years ago would be experiencing?
There's going to be a part of it that I'd say there's part of it that's the same, just like there is with basic emotions. Are there basic emotions? But certain mental states and certain percepts are going to have things that are much more constant because they change very slowly and biologically. Things are something, and so yes, there's going to be things that are universal in human beings because they're part of what we are as a part of natural history. They're part of our natural history, which is much more slower than our cultural history. But at the same time, we can't take those things when we talk about things like disgust, or we talk about things like shame or fear or pride or happiness or the joy of realizing that you're part of something greater than yourself and you have a narrative. Those aren't given to us simply. They seem like they're just simple revelations in the psychedelic sense of, we see our own minds. They can feel that way. But maybe we should be a bit more skeptical. And a good way of being skeptical is to be prepared to change, to radically revise what we think our mental states are in the light of, our best means of knowing things, which is science. So I would argue for a revisionary naturalism.
I mean, see, the thing I don't understand about I'm looking at this passage from Seneca now. This is one that always sticks in my mind. He says, this is when he's talking, this is from his book, his tract on anger. Okay. He says, do battle with yourself. If you have the will to conquer anger, it cannot conquer you. Your conquest has begun if it is hidden away, if it is given no outlet. Let us conceal the signs of it, and as far as is possible, let us keep it hidden and secret. This will cost us a great deal of trouble, for it is eager to leap out and inflame the eyes and alter the face. But if it is allowed to display itself outside ourselves, if it is then on top of us, in the lowest recess of the heart, let it be hidden away, and let it not drive, but be driven. Moreover, let us change all its symptoms into the opposite. Let the expression on our faces be relaxed, our voices gentler, our steps more measured. Little by little, outer features mold the inner ones. I mean, how different is that from your typical Sam Harris meditation session?
Jamesian theories, Jamesian theory that our outer expression shapes our inner sense. Of course it's recognizable. It's an appeal to moderation or to a temperance.
I agree. It's basically the same as today.
It's an appeal to temperance.
That has changed not one iota. It could have been written yesterday.
It's recognizable, but there are points in history where it will be taken more seriously than at other times because the circumstances are different. There might be, temperance might be less of a virtue in some circumstances than the historical circumstances than others. Temperance might not have been a virtue if you're in a war for survival, for example. It's a different, but yeah, there's parts of it that are recognizable, and but it's not given to us as a single thing. It seems like this is an appeal to temperance. I recognize it as such, but even so, it's not as simple as it seems. And history might change, and there might be periods of time where, well, you don't want temperance.
I think it's worth remembering that changes in history and changes in circumstance don't really they're not really separate from material and the natural,
Very much. They clearly, often I think the ones that are most influential are material, either in terms of bare economics, in terms of sufficiency, there's that word again for you academic, or technology. I think the technological changes that have been brought by mass communication have material naturalistic science-based changes that have changed the human mind. How tools change our minds.
Can I ask you all a question then? I mean, do you think the Soviet man from 1964, after 2 generations of communism in Russia was any less selfish than the American man in 1964 after the exact same period. And I mean, does the economic system really change what people are like?
I think no. I think that the Soviet Union burned a lot of the furniture and replaced it with much crappier ones, but the house's foundations still stand.
I don't think it changed, no.
So how, I mean, how dramatic, like, okay, let's compare both of them with the 12th century French peasant. Was he less selfish? The poor old peasant there who's living under the feudal lord?
Again, not really. You're talking really about now human nature thing, and yeah. So okay, but that changes very slowly, if at all, and it changes very slowly, so like for that you'd have to compare it to I mean the Homo sapiens of 70,000 years ago, something like that. Ask if that's different. Yes.
But so for all intents and purposes, for the entirety of human history, human beings have basically been the same. So we can't, so we can, unless we are being really pedantic about it, say that there are certain things that have been universal.
There are certain things, but I'm going to be pedantic here. I want to be a classical skeptic, and I'm going to say I'd have to know more about this selfishness, this thing that's being called selfishness. I'd have to know more about it to be able to judge, because
I guess if push came to shove, he would go for his own survival ahead of his
basic animal and the animal individualism, that's sure, but that's not entirely what we mean by selfish. I'm sure the 12th century French peasant would have had a stronger idea of their investment in community than an American from the 1960s. For example, somebody who's a product of a modern capitalist economy is going to have a very different idea of self and other, and the relationships of responsibility between them than somebody who's a product of a feudal system, for example.
Let's compare it to people of the East, like from India. The sense of self is quite different.
I mean, this is something they've shown in many experiments where. The classic one is that they get people to complete the sentence "I am," and a Westerner is much more likely to complete the sentence "I am" with their hobbies and interests, like "I am a jazz fan," I am into talking on YouTube about philosophy. Whereas in the East, they're much more likely to complete that sentence with their social relations, like "I am a brother," "I am a mother," "I am a I don't know, whatever. I am a member of this community, whatever.
I'm an employee of this company, or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, and that is clearly some consequence of individualism
versus communitarianism. Some cultures are more individualistic. Weird cultures, to use Haid's term, weird cultures are very individualistic, whereas the cultures in sort of Oriental cultures tend to be more communistic or communal. Communitarian is the word.
Culture undoubtedly plays a part as to what is valued, but the raw ingredients cannot be like you're building a different house, but you're still building out of Play-Doh or whatever. The raw material cannot change.
What I call for is a scientific architecture, so we can understand the building materials and we can understand the construction techniques and what's possible. That's why I think where I think that the natural sciences can contribute, and they can contribute quite a lot, because they're our best way of not being wrong. And we could, if we better understand what it is of which we are made and how we work, then we have a better understanding of how these things play out.
So one of the issues I still have with Zarathustra here, and I'm not attacking him, it's just it's a problem I've always had with this kind of Nietzschean, I guess, subjective line of, where you take the subjective experience as being the center of being, or something like this. I mean, to me, it seems absurdly, almost kind of like why should nobody else can possibly care about your experience, right? It's very kind of self-centered. So why privilege that as a category of truth? Like how can we care? Like surely the best we can hope for is that my sense experience have some can be reproduced by your sense experience.
Well, the thing is, it's not only one person. It's an entire group that feels it. This is what I mean. Pop culture. It's not just one guy feels it. People agree that this is real jazz and this is fake jazz. Okay, there are some disagreements, but there's a lot of agreement. So people all experience the same thing, and this is their truth, the truth of their and they build an identity on a group identity on it. So this is again what I'm focusing on.
For some reason, the idea of their truth as opposed to this other group's truth makes me feel uncomfortable, but I don't know why.
Well, it's because this is at the heart of things like Marxism, things like fascism, things like the whole Hegelian ideas. These are things where people self-actualize by becoming part of a larger group or a community or a process of history. Maybe that's why it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, but if you realize that it's only your truth and you don't try to impose it on other people, then it's not as dangerous as fascism and communism.
But then we seem to fall into deconstructionism and relativism, and that. And
again, I remind you that this is just a truth experience. It's not a truth. It's not the thing that we base science on, for instance. You don't build science on it.
Jonathan Haidt, who you've mentioned.
The Nazis and the communists created science based on the truth. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about experiencing this ecstasy thing, and science is a different field.
I just wanted to mention that Jonathan Haidt does talk about exactly what Zarathustra is talking about here in the book The Righteous Mind. He talks about something called the hive switch, where I mean, basically he says that 90% of the time human beings are more or less self-interested, but we also have this 10%, he calls it 90% chimp and 10% bee. Do with that metaphor what you will. But he says in these 10% of cases, human beings have this ability to almost flick a switch and transcend their own selves to become part of something bigger than themselves. And in this moment, they experience something close to ecstasy, which feels better than sex. This is what he talks about. And people experience it at football games, they experience it at raves, they experience it in church congregations, they must have experienced it at Hitler's rallies, they probably experience it at Donald Trump's rallies too. So is this something close to what you're getting at, Zarathustra? Are we all happy with this kind of transcendent hive switch thing?
It's kind of close. I should mention that again, your problem, the problems that you're raising are moral problems. How do we create a morality based on that? And this is something that I have been dealing with. And Nietzsche doesn't give the answer. I think his moral, his
skeptical
ethics
of morals. He's very skeptic when it comes to morals.
I think his ethics fail, and his ethics fail. I think, but there aren't. I mean. The man who basically gave the answer is David Bowie, and this is the thing that I'm, I will talk about eventually. This is how do we navigate life if we base it on this kind of experience?
Well, I'm fascinated because as a huge Bowie fan, I'm fascinated, but that my gut instinct is to say that Bowie is consistently weary of following a group like that. I'm thinking of something like fashion, beep beep. Isn't he weary?
I just love to know what.
And then a year later, creating another.
We're not talking the Tin Machine period, I presume.
No, but you're talking about an experience that creates a subculture that rises and falls, and then when it dies, you just create something new. You have to self-criticize all the time and see when it no longer is the truth, when it no longer is happiness, when it becomes immoral. When the kids kill the man, had to break up the band. When it becomes immoral, when it becomes not happy anymore, you just rebel against it and create something new, and find something new.
So this calls for judgment, doesn't it? There's a judgment call involved there. If you're not going to become an evil collectivist and an uncritical part of the hive mind, there's a need for judgment, isn't there?
Yep.
Where does that come from?
From wanting to be happy, so from wanting to be
sometimes
happy,
we can be happy. We can want to be happy. Stops us from making judgment because we fear we might not get the outcome that we desire. So we put off judgment because it might make us unhappy. That happens with a lot of people. Surely wanting to be happy isn't that kind of hedonism isn't enough to make us wise in our judgment.
Well, can't I be like miserable but true? That's what...
It does if you believe that the truth is something that changes all the time. That you have to follow the spirit of the zeitgeist. Then to be happy, you understand that you have to self-criticize all the time to see if you're still in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, but some people are radicals, some people are conservative, some people see things change where some people see change, some people are naturally blind to it or don't want to see it. There's going to be differences of opinion. So,
okay, but that's a different thing. I'm talking about a way of life here,
it's a way of life based on introspection. On the introspective psychedelic mind is revealing itself, then that's going to be very fragmented. And how do you reach political accord? I mean, and political accord isn't everybody singing from the same sheet. I mean, just the basic liberal idea of everybody not tearing each other's throats out.
Since you understand that to create, to change, to be able to change, to break out of your world, you need someone to come from another world and give you a hand and pull you out. So you need other cultures around you.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, we have enough problem with this groupishness with Twitter. Never mind, sort of like how does this work? Is it one of us? Does it have to be one of us who changes our mind? In which case, we're in an echo chamber.
It has to be an alien. Look, for Bowie, it's always the alien that comes and pulls you out of your world and gets you to a better world. And so you have to. So the conclusion, the moral conclusion, is that you have to also work to ensure the freedom of other groups.
Okay, are there evil aliens? What about ISIS recruiters? Are those evil aliens?
Well, they are immoral, and they go against this pluralistic society. So we are against them.
I was just going to. It just so happened that earlier on, about an hour before we came on this stream, I read this passage that really jumped out at me and hit me in the face, and it seems appropriate to this little conversation that we're having here. And I think it may actually be going towards one of the reasons why I'm getting a little uncomfortable at some of Zarathustra's ideas. I'll just read it, and then I'll maybe editorialize a little bit. He says, "Politicians have supposed the man is really what he should be. That his reason will do all it can, and his passions and prejudices no more than they ought, whereas his reason is a mere looker-on. It is moderation when it should be zeal. It is often corrupted to vindicate where it should condemn, and is a coward or a trimmer that will take hush money. Popular reason does not always know how to act right, nor does it always act right when it knows. The agents that move politics are the popular passions, and those are ever, from the very nature of things, under the command of the disturbers of society. Few can reason, all can feel, and such an argument is gained as soon as it is proposed." And this is where I start getting a little bit antsy. Is this? I mean, he's right. All people can feel, and everybody can feel happy, even though that they're wrong. So I don't understand where this. He says the agents that move politics are the disturbers of society. So, what if you don't want society to be disturbed? This feels like a path to dark places to me, instinctively. Any thoughts? I don't know. I feel like there must be a more sensible approach than these constant revolutions led by David Bowie.
These revolutions, remind you, are not political revolutions. The revolutions of the mind. They are cultural, aesthetic revolutions. When it comes to politics, basically, we live in the best society. We live in the democratic liberal society, and we don't know anything better. So now we're focused on revolutions of the mind.
Here's what. Okay, let me just put it plain. What I'm trying to get at. What if the David Bowie of now is Jennifer Lawrence, who all of us, I assume, do not agree with when she's pushing her SJW politics on everybody else? What if the zeitgeist of now is social justice? None of us old cronies are on board. So what happens then? I mean, what if we're just out of what if we are the zeitgeist of the Romantic period started out in one way, and it ended up that Wordsworth was a conservative by the end of his life. So what if that is all of us? I mean,
after the ash heap of history, I guess.
So what we're all just unwitting vanguards now against.
You just need to get with the program, Daddy-O.
Against the latest Bowie, who is Jennifer Lawrence. I mean, I don't know. Like, how do you identify the Bowie of now? I guess is where I'm coming from.
Well, look, the SJWs don't believe in change and don't believe in it's a completely different thing. And they don't believe in the diversity that I talked about, in the pluralism I talked about. So I from my ethics, I oppose them. Yeah,
But I think the question is, where in your particular approach to ethics does the stability to form virtue come from? Because you need some stability to form virtue. Where is that in your system?
Well, first, I think that when you talk about morality, the moral laws, they are universal. We basically, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal. Those are universal things. They're interpreted differently, but those are universal. So you can judge. You can judge your culture on moral standards, for moral criteria, and see if it is still virtuous. Is it still, again, is it still happy? Does it still make people happy? Which, again, to remind you, you must. There's always this thing that that this happiness will eventually fade. This happiness, that this thing that you are right now feeling, your truth right now will not be the truth 2 years from now. So you're going to need a way out, and the way out for Bowie is always someone coming from the outside and reaches his hand and pulls you out, and so for that you need
Jesus. Like Jesus.
I mean, I'm obviously wary of this because, as you know, I'm against a philosopher king telling me people what to do. Yeah. I'd rather. I mean, I don't know. My thinking would go along the lines of, let's take the SJW thing, okay? I will always say something like, emphasizing shared similarity makes people less racist, while emphasizing differences between racial groups makes people more racist. And I hold that to be a self-evident, that's self-evident. It's a fact, and it's not going to stop being true 50 years from now or 100 years from now. So I would prefer people to focus on their shared humanity as opposed to what makes them different if they're all going to live in the same society. And that, that's my vision of a harmonious future, diverse, but also, we're all the same ultimately.
Yeah.
Now, if you have this version of the truth that keeps on changing all the time, I can't make that statement, can I?
Why? Because look, if you again, let's go back. You need the alien to come and pull you out. So you need to be able to connect to that alien. You need to be able to see the. You have to believe that you're both the same in some way. You are of your group right now. He might be part of your group 2 years from now. So we are all part of the same humanity. Okay, so we are all parts of several groups. Yes.
Why do I need Dave to tell me that? Like, why can't I just I don't know, infer that from the facts of history and from empirical evidence?
Okay, but I'm talking. You asked about this. How do I justify it for my way of life, for my ethics of this constant change, and I'm telling you, it's to be able to do this change, this periodical change. You have to be able to connect to people who are not in your group right now. And for that, you have to keep on seeing their humanity, seeing them as the people from the other side of the wall. You want to be able to connect with them at that moment when you're not. So you see all of them as your brothers and sisters, all of humanity. And you protect the right to be different from you, because you need you need someone different to pull you out. So with all of those things, you basically get to a morality that defends freedom and defends everybody's rights.
In a way, I can see what you mean. I can see what you mean, that we need. This is like this is the use of enchantment. Enchantment as in living one's life as if enraptured in a song, as in chanteur. I can see what you mean. I can see the use of that in shaping our values, and that's what the art does. That's what the great narratives. I think it was Herodotus who said the things that tie the Greeks together, the Hellas together, is their not only their language but the stories they tell and the tales that they tell within that language. And I can see having this kind of enraptured state, this mythical, poetic state, and it plays a part. It even plays a part in being something quite secular, like a liberal democrat or a humanist. There are usually stories tied to that, which make us commit to certain values by which we want to live our lives. My concern is that sufficient? I can see that it's necessary. I'll even admit that it's necessary to some degree. But is it sufficient?
I would also want to pull back from. So even though I said that we need to see a common humanity in order to become less racist, I'm also realistic about what human beings are. Human beings are always tribal. Human beings are always going to have competing groups. That is also part of our nature, observable all the way throughout history. So I always want to try to get to the point where you describe how men are, not how they ought to be, right? And to me, the way men are is that basically, if allowed, they may form these tribes and rip each other apart. So ideally, those are the raw materials we have to work with, and we want to try to get to a point where we create the right kind of structures and narratives and things to discourage that sort of thing from happening. But that's not to forget the fact that it probably will still break out and still happen at some point.
No, it isn't as easy as you just have to change the basic economic circumstances and human nature will be born anew. It isn't as straightforward as that. Yeah.
What if, I mean, this is a little bit radical. What if you change the raw materials? What if eventually the technology gets good enough to change human nature?
You'd have to be very careful ecologically, because there might be unforeseen harms. But if you've got that, then yeah, why not? We do that with medicine anyway already.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of like CRISPR-9 and maybe looking forward even more exotic ways of playing around with this sort of thing.
Can I have a genetically modified kind of GIMP to be more submissive than I am, to carry out my everyday chores? I don't like cleaning the bathroom. Can I can I get like a gamma or epsilon person to do that?
How subhuman would they have to be before you reintroduced slavery?
Well, I mean, I don't know. My mind went to Brave New World as soon as he said it. But.
It is that. It's things like, it's issues like that. You have to. What is the question? It's quite. These are interesting questions. These aren't questions that are easy to answer. I haven't got an answer for them, but they're interesting because I haven't got an answer for them, and they test what I think I know, morally speaking. These issues. This is why discussions of issues is a good thing, is a virtue, because it tests our certainties, not because it reinforces them. And that's the problem. I think one of the big problems at the moment is everybody's having their certainties reinforced, especially their certainties with regard to the out group or the other or the people on the other side of the fence. When really it's better to listen to the arguments. Sorry, I'll get my soapbox now.
So have we got any closer to defining the truth here? I mean,
We have been attempting to define the truth for thousands of years. You want to do it in a YouTube video?
There's not going to be an answer that everybody agrees on, but there's a lot. But the positions that we've covered are all there in the debates that people have had previously. We're lucky enough to belong to a very rich culture and a very rich civilization, where lots of these ideas have been discussed and people have thought about them. And if you discuss them in good faith, you can benefit from that. Even people who disagree politically can both benefit, and maybe even learn how to tolerate things that, some tolerance, some recognition that any complex polity or political group, not everybody's going to be agreeing with everybody else. It's not going to happen. And there is, I agree with you, Academic Agent, that there's a danger in thinking, yeah, but if we just get the revolution, everybody will be singing from the same hymn sheet. That's actually an illiberal idea.
Yeah, and it's not. Well, I blame Rousseau for so many of these ills.
Yeah, it's Rousseau. It is what Wordsworth fell for it in his early days, and he became a conservative when he fell out of it. Interestingly enough, I think.
Yeah.
So there you go. Interesting.
Yeah, we managed to have the whole conversation. We didn't mention God once. That's got to be
I think if Jesus was mentioned. There was a slight comment about Jesus.
Oh, right, okay. Well done. Great. Should we Croc, do you want to wrap it up?
All right then.
It's been.
Well,
I think.
Is there anything more?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I'd say it was interesting. Was what was billed as a discussion about epistemology has actually shifted more towards a question of axiology of values and ethics and different competing ethics, which is interesting.
That's what I was hoping for with these talks, that it will just go in every direction and go into art and science, and this is what I was hoping for. So this was good.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, if nobody has anything else to add, this has been yet another episode of Complete Croc. Thank you for joining us.